It is now my privilege to introduce our featured speaker for our luncheon today, Father John Forliti. Father Forliti arrived at St. Thomas as its first Vice President for Student Affairs in 1985. At that time, Student Affairs consisted of the Dean of Students' Office, Campus Ministry, and Counseling and Career Services. He was a beloved figure on campus and is still remembered very fondly. And he was praised for his work in bringing together our student life programs. In 1992, he left St. Thomas to become pastor of St. Olaf Catholic Church in downtown Minneapolis. After 30 years as a teacher and administrator, he was called to full-time parish work. He stayed at St. Olaf until 2004, at which time he retired and became chaplain for St. Catherine University. He was there until 2016. He continues to support youth ministry at Cretin-Durham Hall in St. Paul, where he graduated in 1954. I know many of you know Father Forliti, and we've experienced such an outpouring of excitement ever since we announced that he was going to be our speaker today. So please join me in a very warm welcome for Father John Forliti.
When Dr. Sullivan called me many months ago and asked me if I would do this, I said, happily so. And then I wondered a couple weeks back when I started to prepare, why did I say yes? And I've had a lot of fun actually preparing, well, that's not really true, preparing my remarks today. But I've been back and forth, different things. Which way should I go? This way? Should I go that way? And I have a prepared speech, and I'll give that, and I'm happy to do so. But just a couple of thoughts before. One of my hobbies over the years has been piano. Love to play the piano. And we used to have a family band, and way back, I doubt whether my dad, my two brothers, and I played at your wedding, but we could have back in the 50s. For some of you, back in the 50s. When I retired 14 years ago, 2004, after St. Olaf, at that retirement party, I gave away a CD of my piano. And I know that since then, people have told me they really enjoyed it. In one case, there was a man who was dying. Actually, this is a true story, and the tape he wanted to hear, the music he wanted to hear, was my music. So, well, that's neat. So I've had, not too many comments over the years, but walking down the hallway at Cretin-Durham about 4 years ago, one of the students there, I didn't know you could play the piano. And I said, where'd you find that out? He said, I bought your CD. I said, where did you buy? I mean, we gave them away, okay? They weren't for sale. I said, where'd you buy my CD? He said, I bought it at Goodwill. So I thank God for recycling. It's still being used. Looking at you is humbling. I've actually always had a little bit of hesitation at the higher education level, even when I was there at St. Thomas for those 7 years. And it comes partly because my own father had only 2 years of grade school, not 8, but 2, arriving in St. Paul at the age of 14. He went to the same school I went to, St. Andrews, for 4th grade and 5th grade. The reason why he went from 4th to 5th was that, well, he started in the 4th grade. He actually started in the 1st grade, but he didn't fit the chair. He was an immigrant kid, didn't speak a word of English. So the 2nd grade, this is fast, this is how smart we are. 2nd grade, he was in the the second day of school, second grade, third day of school, third grade, he fit the chair in the fourth. And that's where he stayed for that year. So he only had 2 years of grade school, and my mother never had any high school. She grew up in the Italian community on the east side. But the one thing that they wanted their 5 boys to accomplish was high school education. You have to finish high school. And I was really the only one in our family of the 5 boys that went beyond that. And so it's been always for me kind of scary to be in front of you, but not really. Not really at all. What I'd like to talk about a few weeks back when I spoke with members of the staff at UST, what should I talk about? They asked me. I said, well, there are 2 things you might reflect on: the common good, and, well, it's Christmas time. It's Christmas luncheon. So I'm going to try to bring those 2 together: the common good and the Christmas season. I was at St. Thomas as Vice President for Student Affairs from 1985 to 92. And just a few things from those years that you might recall. It was those years that, in the interest of the common good, the neighbors really forced St. Thomas to have permit parking in the neighborhood. It was during those years that we emerged from college to university status. It was during those years that we remodeled Murray Hall and established scooters in honor of Father Lavin. It was those years that we worked hard, and I was put in charge of neighborhood relations, among other things. And I'll never forget one night riding with a posse. Some of the neighbors there were so concerned about the parties that were happening, and St. Thomas was not doing much to control those. And so I actually rode in a hearse. They had 2 hearses that people in the neighborhood had purchased. And I was seated in a lawn chair in one of the hearses, and we're traveling around, and they're reporting to the police, which houses had 500 kids there, 500 students. And they wanted me to see what was going on. Well, it was after that we actually expanded the Dean of Students office and hired an assistant dean, and some of you may have been the beneficiaries of that. I remember one day, because I would show up on Saturday afternoon around roughly 1 o'clock at the party house, and I'd have the names of the students who were living there, and of course there were another half dozen also living there. And I'd say, well, and I'd have the collar on in case they didn't know who I was. But one day I had some students, they asked if they could see me, so we made an appointment. And there were 2 of them. They sat in my office, and they threatened to call the ACLU because I was violating their privacy. I said, I'm sorry, but everything I know about was not private. It was all very public. And it was those years that we began to move in on the neighborhood relations, and took a different turn. It was good, for the common good. It's December. It's the Alumni Christmas First Friday Gathering. And as I mentioned, my title is The Common Good and the Christmas Spirit. Initially, I'm sure that I learned about the common good at home when my mother said, "Cover your mouth when you cough." I was probably 3. My mother again, "Bring the soup to Mrs. Hanson, she's sick." "But she's Lutheran," I replied. "Go," Ma said. I was 5. I was 5 also when our nation entered the Second World War. Today is 77 years ago today, December 7th, that Pearl Harbor happened. And those of us who grew up even at 5 years old during the war, we knew something about the common good because that was the top priority. We were in this together, an entire nation placing top priority on the common good. I was 9 when the war ended. Not long after the war, wide-eyed and stunned, I watched the Minnesota National Guard keep the peace when the meat packers in South St. Paul went on strike for a living wage. My dad, a common laborer with no pension, no workman's comp, no paid vacation, wanted me to feel the pain of injustice and the why of the union movement. I was 12. During the summer of 1961, I worked in Norton, Virginia, the deeply segregated South. And there I saw bigotry plastered on public drinking fountains, whites only. I also saw the movie theater not letting in any African Americans on the first floor. They had to go up to the balcony, which was never swept or cleaned. I was 24. In March of 1965, I listened to the racist words of hate spewed from closed hearts as I walked with thousands of others from Selma to Montgomery. Armed soldiers keeping us safe, their rifles pointed outward towards the hate. I was 29. In the 1970s, when the city of Minneapolis failed to care for its growing population of homeless, with my parishioners at St. Francis Cabrini, we opened our parish hall, including the basement of the rectory where I lived, so we could house 30 homeless from October to April. I was 41. In 1995 was my first trip to Nairobi, Kenya. I'll never forget standing on the street corner in Kibera, one of the largest slums in the world, where a few days earlier, a 17-year-old boy was accused and executed without trial. Mob justice, I never heard about it, but mob justice in Kenya because of the totally corrupt police department and the equally corrupt judicial system. I was 59 and grateful that I lived in America. This past summer, I was nearly brought to tears reading the National Geographic's issue on plastics dumped in our oceans that threatened our food chain and the welfare of future generations. I was 82. The common good is all around us. We can't escape it, but we're not always conscious of it. In fact, Father Tom Conroy, who taught many of you theology, I think for 30 years at St. Thomas, told me one day I was writing a book on the common good, and he said it was the most difficult topic or concept to get across to students, college students. And that may be true today, I don't know. But we've gone through from the common good generation, where I was small, it was the we, and we've gone through several decades now of the me generation. I'm suggesting that the common good and the Christmas spirit belong to each other. And my point is simply this: the common good, I think, is what Christmas is all about. I'm picking out 3 points of Christmas: compassion, hope, and peace based on right relationships. I saw the Christmas spirit alive in Guatemala. I saw it in Rome. I saw it in Kenya. And I want to share those 3 stories. Come with me now to Christmas Eve, 1969. I'm a young priest, 33 years old. I traveled to Guatemala to visit my priest friend, Father Greg Schaefer, and to get a feel for life in the missions. At that time, Guatemala was in the midst of an ugly civil war. There were trigger-happy teenagers, soldiers now, on practically every street corner. It took us a while. It was a 70-mile trip from the airport in Guatemala City to San Lucas Toliman, where the mission was, and still is. And as we arrived towards the mission, Father Greg directs my attention to this procession. It's very dark, it's almost midnight, and it's the Posada Procession. and they're going from house to house, knocking on the door, hoping there's room for Mary to give birth to the child Jesus. And the tradition is no, 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 no. But there will be room at the church. And so we arrive at the church just before midnight mass is to begin. As we enter that parking area next to the church, I notice that there are some women, and they're tending a fire, and they are cooking pork wrapped in leaves that will be given later after Mass. Well, I'm into the Mass. I stood way in the back and watched. It was beautiful. The pews were filled. The music was full-throated. The enthusiasm, the faith of this community was amazing. It's my first night in a foreign country, and it's Guatemala Christmas Eve. So Mass ends, but everyone stays in anticipation, because earlier that day, those women had been cooking the meat. Everyone in the church, every kid is given a paper plate, and they're given a piece of meat. Probably, for most of those people, the only time they will have meat all year. The pews become tables as the community celebrates its communion with God and with each other. It was a sight to behold. I need to mention that only a few years earlier, before the priests from Minnesota, the sisters, the lay volunteers from here, had come to San Lucas, they had no school, no clinic, a stale economy. But in that brief time, the Christian spirit of compassion, of hope, and of peace lifted the common welfare of that entire Guatemalan community. When I got there, 1969, the new school was filled to capacity. Its new clinic was busy every day offering medical assistance. And the economy of the area had been lifted up because Father Greg had brought down to Guatemala stonemasons, carpenters, and others to teach the people there to set up these kind of small co-ops where they had money now to buy some food and to buy some eggs and to buy some meat for their families. The difference that community from here, from Minnesota, has made to that Guatemalan community is tremendous. Just the other day, yesterday morning, I was talking with one of the teachers at Cretin-Derham. She and two other teachers and 18 students, seniors from Cretin-Derham, had just gotten back from San Lucas Toliman a couple days ago. And she was amazed. I was there 49 years ago, and I was amazed then. And she said she was amazed to see what this community is like now, with the hospital, with the school, with everything else that's going on. The Christmas spirit infusing the common good of an entire community. Second story, I'm in Rome. Another experience of the Christian spirit, transforming the common good. The year is 1992. I'm 56. My friend, Dr. Claudio Betti, a university professor, is a founding member of a growing Catholic community of laymen and women, many of them professionals, who commit to daily prayer and who commit to do the work of the community as volunteers. I wonder from Claudio, what's happened now since I saw you last a few years ago? He says, follow me. First stop, he brings me to a nursery that they have just set up to care for the abandoned infants with AIDS who were languishing at that time in Rome hospitals. The next day, they were going to receive a half dozen of these infants in this nursery, and they would take care of them. The next stop, we walked over to a two-story residence that the community had recently purchased. It was already at capacity, housing 24, they use the word abbandonati, which is the Italian word for abandoned elderly men and women they have really picked up from the streets. But that's not it. Third stop, we sit down for lunch at the community's dining hall for homeless, a lot like our Dorothy Day Center. The spaghetti they serve the homeless is as good as any spaghetti I found in any Italian restaurant. They asked me to sit with the English-speaking homeless. But Claudio had one more thing to show me. He led me back to the community's headquarters, and he shows me a room that has a large conference table. He tells me that within a few hours, that room will be occupied by representatives of the government of Mozambique and representatives of the guerrilla army. For 30 years, that African nation, which borders Tanzania and South Africa, had been involved in civil strife, the last 17 of those years in actual civil war. During that time, millions of people had been displaced, 3 million at least, and hundreds of thousands had lost their lives. So I'm in the room that afternoon is going to become, for the next year, the place where a peace process is worked out. This was 26 years ago. And what happened at the end of that 1 year was that the guerrillas gave up their weapons to the UN, and the government was established as a democratic government. And so today, it is still Mozambique, a nation of 30 million people. As a result of this small group of Catholic men and women, why that community as the negotiators? Because Claudio told me it was the only group that both sides felt trustworthy to help them negotiate this peace. And so there again, a community, the compassion, the hope, and the peace based on right relationships, the Christmas spirit enhancing, infusing an entire nation, which today numbers over 30 million. The final story. This one begins more at home, but doesn't end there. 3 weeks ago, I had lunch with a man named Timon Bondo. Timon is in his mid-80s. Now he's totally blind, but that doesn't stop him from visiting his home village in Kenya for 3 months every year. He left for Bondo, Kenya, a few days after we had lunch. He's there at this very moment. Well, Timo and I have lunch about once a month. And usually I can count on him giving me a long list of needs back in Rabondo. But lunch 3 weeks ago, was very different. With tears in his eyes, he expressed to me his gratitude and appreciation for what the parishioners at St. Olaf in downtown Minneapolis have done for his entire community, the entire village. And here's how it happened. It was while I was pastor at St. Olaf, it was 2003, when this man from Kenya, actually from Golden Valley, which is where he's lived for the last 40 years, he wants an appointment. He wanted me to help him build a high school. Well, at that time, I already had 6 other projects in Africa we were raising money for. And I told him, no, I can't add another project. He would not leave my office until I got something. He got something. And what he got from me was, okay, I'll write to 10 pastors around the Twin Cities, give them your name and telephone number, ask you to, see. One invited, one pastor, Father John Bauer from Deep Haven. And at that meeting was a couple who promised Timon afterwards, we'll give you $50,000. He was after $100,000 to build a high school. We'll give you 50, but you have to raise the other 50 elsewhere. Well, Jim Ryan and Colleen, the couple, Jim would go to Mass 7 o'clock, St. Olaf, morning after morning. After he had made this promise, 3 or 4 days later, after Mass, Jim Ryan says to me, come here. How could you say no to Timon? He said, I couldn't. Get him in there. So we ended up raising $26,000. Jim and Colleen, another 20. We're up at 96. They built a school. I was there to dedicate it in 2006. This year, another 89 boys and girls will be added to the more than 800 teenagers from Rabonda who have received a high school education. Many of those graduates have gone on to further education, obtaining degrees in education, engineering, medical practice, information technology, social work, and other areas. And I'll never forget the mother of one of the girls who had just gotten her diploma, with tears in her eyes, thanking me, not just me, but the people of the Twin Cities, for making it possible for her daughter. Because in that area, girls never had a chance to go to school. Boys only if they could go to a boarding school. So we built St. Timo's, a school that today is functioning beautifully and has made an incredible difference to the entire community. Again, the Christmas spirit infusing an entire community, making an incredible difference to people. The Christmas spirit from Minnesota to Kenya. When I saw that the University of St. Thomas had adopted all for the common good as its motto, I was more than delighted. Among the challenges threatening the common good of humanity today there are many, and they're huge problems. Global warming, harmful pesticides, nuclear arms, the integrity of our democratic system, our judicial system, healthcare, immigration. I mean, the list is long. And they can seem so far away and so overwhelming that we wonder whether you or I as individuals can do anything. But the stories that I've tried to share today and shared with you, I think encourage me, and I hope encourage all of us, that the common good is so critical to the future of civilization and so overwhelming that we must not let cynicism hold us back, and we can't let abandoning, giving up, be our response either. And so I like to compare the common good with our human body. The human body has all these systems, the nervous system, bones, etc. The social body, the structures of the social body are just as important, and there are many: government, medicine, religion, education, law, the judiciary, business, banking, the military, to name some of the most obvious. How critical it is to the common good that all of these institutions and structures be healthy. And how critical it is for higher education especially, and for St. Thomas, to continue to hold up the common good as something to aspire to infuse with the Christmas spirit, to infuse with compassion, to infuse with hope, and to infuse with justice. And so it's a tall order. Achieving the common good is rarely an easy task. It demands commitment, service above self, and certainly love for a fellow human being. You probably heard about the two guys walking the beach, and one says to the other, "Do you know what the two greatest problems in the world are today?" The other guy says, "No, what?" The first guy says, "Ignorance and apathy." Second guy says, "I don't know and I don't care." Thank God, I thank God, and I think we all do, that St. Thomas knows the importance of the common good and cares, and invites all of us to join in that effort to infuse the common good with the Spirit of Jesus Christ and the Christmas spirit. And so I conclude by saying a blessed Christmas to you all. And should you or I choose not to say Merry Christmas as we go around our next few weeks, we can always say Happy Holy Days. Thank you for coming today, and may God bless you all.
Thank you, Father Forliti, and thank you for igniting that Christmas spirit within each of us with your inspiring stories and reminding us of the importance of our commitment to the common good. Thank you so much. I really am grateful that you accepted our invitation to speak today. Thank you. So, at the grand finale now is I have the pleasure to introduce to you the St. Thomas Chamber Singers, who performed at our Christmas concert last Sunday in Orchestra Hall. And I'd like to thank their gifted director, Dr. Angela Brooker. And before I turn it over to them, I'd like to invite the person at your table whose birthday is closest to December 25th to take the centerpiece. Happy Holy Days and Merry Christmas.
A good old man named Simeon said, I'm never gonna rest till I see that Messiah child and hold him to my breast. Oh, for the love of one sweet little babe.
Sweet little babe.
For the love of the sweet baby child.
One sweet little baby. Then he gonna speak against the child. Oh, that's true. And your mother Mary, she will bear that will pierce her heart through. Oh, for the love of one sweet little babe. Oh, for the love of one sweet baby child. Oh, for the love of one sweet little baby, we have come. So we have come. So come and praise our God on high and worship His name. His Son has come to save us and free us from pain. Oh, for the love of one sweet little baby. Oh, for the love of one sweet baby child. Oh, for the love of one sweet little baby, we have of a sweet little baby.
Thank you so much, everyone, for inviting the chamber singers to be part of your celebration today. We conclude with Joy to the World, and if you look on the screens on either side, you'll see some words. We'd love to have you join with us. And on behalf of the Choral Department at the University of St. Thomas, let us too wish you a beautiful Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays. Thank you.